Welcome to Ask Fear and Greed, where we take your questions and do our best to answer them. I'm Michael Thompson, and good afternoon, Sean Aylmer.
Hello, Michael.
Sean, today's question is, it's a bit different today. Today's question, it comes from Scott, and he has sent it in via LinkedIn. And he says, I've been reading about the decision by the Washington Post not to endorse a candidate for the US election. Do newspapers normally do this? Do we do it here? I haven't really noticed it much in the past. It is a good question, Sean. I thought it was a good question for you, considering you're a big fan, obviously, of US politics. You have worked in the US for Australian media, but you've also worked in Australian newspapers. So you are probably the most qualified person I know to answer this question.
Right. Well, broadly,
I've really set you up. I've really set you up here, haven't I?
Broadly, newspapers do come down on the side of someone. So if you look at the Financial Review, the Australian, the Age, the Sydney Morning Herald, the Adelaide Advertiser, those organisations, the West Australian, they will tend to come down in an editorial, often the weekend or a week before the election in Australia, and say this is who you should vote for. That is tradition. In the US, it's exactly the same. They do tend to come down. The conservative media comes on one side, the liberal media comes on the other. So the bottom line is, yeah, that does tend to happen, but it's a lot of fun because I used to run the Sydney Morning Herald, and at one point, about 6 months out from the election, we decided that we probably knew which side we would support, and our op-ed writer came and said, you know how we're going to support this person? Well, we've been writing all this other stuff, so we're going to have to sort of change our view a little bit over the next 6 months. And so we then spent 6 months changing our view on things so that when we actually supported the person that we supported, it was appropriate, and people couldn't say, hey, you've changed your mind all of a sudden. It's funny, my counterpart at The Age got in all sorts of trouble because he supported the other person at the time, and not many people were happy about that, and there was all sorts of internal dealings with the board and things like that.
Can I ask you about that process, Sean, of how you decided who you were going to support? Because I imagine it would be an assessment of various policies, the projected kind of impact, kind of how long different parties have been in power for. I imagine there's a whole lot of things that go into it. It's not just I like the look of this guy.
You're right, but there's one other factor, which I'm almost ashamed to admit it, right? You want to pick the winner. So if you have got an editorial and there's going to be a clear winner and you say vote for the other person,
yeah,
and that's like in our instance, it was clear who was going to win the election. It's sort of, you don't really want to be on the losing side. But broadly, it is about policies, and you will find the Sydney Morning Herald in the state election the recent state election where Chris Minns won, the Sydney Morning Herald campaigned ferociously around gaming advertising. And so rather than have a really strong view on which side, it had a really strong view on particular policies. So you do get that a little bit, but everyone comes down on one side or the other. Always want to be on the winning side. It should be on the back of policies and stuff like that. But you also, you can imagine some of the journalists, they're kind of, they lean one way or the other, and these ferocious debates you have, very funny.
Well, can I ask you then, in that case, what you make of what is happening in the US then? Because obviously with Jeff Bezos, the Amazon billionaire, who owns the Washington Post, and it appears to have been a decision that he made, because he's also then penned an op-ed as to why he has decided to stop the newspaper from endorsing a candidate. And he's basically said it is about independence, and it is about being impartial, and we want readers to see our newspaper as being an impartial kind of a conveyor of news.
Yeah. And
obviously the editorial team was not happy about that. There were a number of senior resignations from there. What do you think about this? Is it a move that we might see happening here, this kind of push to make the newspapers more impartial, or is it something that could benefit Donald Trump, which is a lot of the criticism of that move?
It's it's not unprecedented. Like that has happened in Australian newspapers before. They say we're going to be independent. I think it's sort of a soft way out because mostly op-ed pages, if you read the Wall Street Journal op-ed pages, they are totally different to the news pages. They are extremely right-wing. And that's their opinion. I like it when media outlets have an opinion, and the op-ed pages and the leaders are the places for that. However, Jeff Bezos owns the paper. He can do what he wants with it, really. And so, I think it's a bit extreme to actually resign. You can kind of get on your high horse and say, how dare you? But there'd be a bunch of people within the Washington Post who would disagree with whatever the decision was, Democrat, Republican, or, don't favour anyone. So it's a healthy church. And I think I like the idea that papers come down or media outlets come down on one side or another, and they are influential. What I think the difference now to when I was running newspapers, though, are the Taylor Swifts of the world. So 10 years ago and prior to that, a newspaper editorial was really influential.
Right.
Today, Taylor Swift's as influential as any newspaper editorial would ever be, particularly from millennials and younger. And so in some ways, that whole idea of getting Taylor Swift's endorsement and a bunch of other celebrity endorsements, which certainly Kamala Harris has done better. Mind you, Donald Trump got Hulk Hogan, so credit where credit's due.
So there are big names on both sides. Yeah.
That's right. I think that endorsement in some ways replaces what newspapers used to be able to do in terms of influence, at least.
All right. Look, I think, Scott, I hope we have answered your question. I've ended up just using this for my own education. I find this whole thing fascinating. And the fact that you actually say that that newspapers were influential in that, because I wouldn't have thought that too many people would change their vote necessarily based on an editorial in the paper. But as you say, it's probably also then it might be the 6 months leading up to it and the editorials as well and the information that's conveyed through those as well, rather than just that one editorial saying this is the side that we're coming down on. So anyway, great question, Scott, and great answer, Sean.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Scott.
And don't forget, if you have your own question that you would like us to answer, it can be as broad as you like. I mean, obviously, this one was pretty broad. You can send it in via LinkedIn, as Scott did, or you can head along to Facebook or Instagram, or go to fearandgreed.com.au if you like. I'm Michael Thompson, and this is Ask Fear and Greed.